we can come back to these. I'll come back to these sections in a bit. Okay, let me talk a little bit more specifically about the CV. As I said, a CV is a document of your scholarly and academic accomplishments. So it should include as much relevant information about you. The emphasis will be on the information and its relevance to academic work. That means, as we indicated, you don't have to talk about yourself or even necessarily your skills or your abilities in the same way that you do in a resume. You want to limit yourself to the most relevant information in terms of scholarship, research, and usually those elements, we divide them up into three large categories: research, teaching, and service. And what you'll find as you move into the academic world itself is that for promotion purposes, for merit purposes, for raises, you are evaluated, and depending on your institution, sometimes very carefully so, on the balance between those three broad categories. At UBC, for instance, there's a general cultural sort of rule that we do 40% research, 40% teaching, and 20% service. And if there's an imbalance in those numbers, then that gets remarked on for promotion purposes and so on. So those are the three general categories that you need to limit yourself to. You need to present this information in a clear and precise and as objective a manner as possible. So, white paper. A standard font, Times Roman 12, which is the standard publishing font. You need to include technical information, your addresses, citizenship, and usually we begin with the education. Two reasons. One, because that's the one thing that everybody wants to know, where you came from and whether you have the requisite degrees, and subtly whether you are finished or not, whether you're ABD or whether you've completed the dissertation. I'll talk a little bit about the order of the information, research, teaching, and service when we get to it, because it's different depending on the kind of job that you're applying for. So I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, but I just want to emphasize the clarity. Come on. Have I missed one? No, that's it. Okay, good. Let me give you a couple of tips for establishing this information. Because the CV is divided into these three broader characters of research, teaching, and service, it's a good idea when you are starting to think about going on the market that you have those three areas covered. Most of you will have done some teaching as teaching assistants or even teaching your own sections of courses in your area, and that's great. And most programs are set up to give you those opportunities, and those matter. Publications are mandatory, pretty much, for getting an academic position of any kind. And even if it's just one publication in a small journal, that's a good start, and people will recognize that, especially if it's cited or reviewed. And I'll talk a little bit more about those priorities. But service is the one thing where actually you have a certain amount of latitude. Get involved with student organizations. Get involved with professional organizations in your field or your area, helping to organize a conference, chairing some panels, being in some kind of student government body, maybe not so much the TA union, but certainly the sort of student organizations on campus. Being involved in your department. The English department at UBC, for instance, has a graduate caucus, and that caucus has an executive. People serve as president and so on. Be involved with departmental committees. Be on hiring committees if your program or department allows you to be. These are ways that on your CV it becomes clear that you can perform the duties of an academic and a professor in that position. In fact, as in the same way that your teaching does, and this is why it's important to be teaching, and research, and that's why it's important to already be published and to emphasize that. Come on. The second tip I'll give you is structure your CV according to the priorities of the target employer. Most significant sections come early in the CV and without embellishment. Again, as I said, you don't have to explain things, you don't have to summarize things. I'll talk about readership in a minute, but Actually, you know what? I'm gonna move on to the third one first. The thing to keep in mind about producing the CV in terms of organizing it and planning it out, I'm skipping ahead, I'll come back to the other one in a second, is the people reading the CV are other academics. They are already familiar with the format that they should have. And so you want to make sure that you maintain that format. And it's this cleanliness, this clarity, this documentary nature of the CV. They're interested as well in documented results, and they are naturally skeptical people. Academics don't trust other people very well. It's just one of those things. You learn this very quickly. And so the emphasis, as in any kind of publication or any kind of record, the emphasis is going to be on the evidence. Where's your documentation? And one of the ways that you can be clear that this is documentary evidence is to keep to standard publication formats and standard formats of presentation. So for instance, when you're listing your publications, you don't summarize them, you just tell them where it is, as you would in a bibliography or in a list of works cited. If the person who's reading the file is interested in you, it's a good chance that they'll go and read it. And if in your field you commonly submit a sample publication with your material when you're on the job market, then it's right there in the file. And the person can say, oh, they've got an article in, oh, I know that in English Studies in Canada or in Past and Present. Oh, that's a great journal. I know that one. I'm going to go and read it. I've got it on my shelf. Hey, look at that. I know the guy who's in the article before you. Wow, that's great. And they're going to get the documentation. They're going to be able to prove to themselves that you've done this work. That's the kind of thing that they want to see, documented evidence. As a result, don't embellish. Don't exaggerate. You don't have to summarize even your dissertation. Usually in an academic portfolio, depending on what field you're in, there will be an abstract of your dissertation or even an abstract of a book or a book proposal or something, depending on what stage you're at. They will go to that when they need to, but for the purposes of this document, you don't clarify, you don't embellish, you don't explain. You might, if you turn over into the next couple pages, on the last page here, you might, and notice the publications page looks an awful lot like a bibliography. And that's exactly what it is. It's your bibliography. Right? It's just a list of publications and exactly where they are, page numbers, year, etc. This is MLA format, which is the standard format for publications in the humanities and in literary studies. It would be in Chicago style if it were a history or other one. It would be in APA if it were for psychology or sociology. So the presentation of your publications should be in the format of whatever field you're in. And that would be either be MLA, Chicago, or APA. And if there are others that I'm unfamiliar with, I apologize, but in the right format. So it's your bibliography, basically. You might have a little bit of embellishment when it comes to things like teaching and service, but keep it to a minimum. Who did you teach with? What kind of things were you taught? What kind of, it's usually a list. You held office hours, you worked with students, you had a group of 30 students, you lectured on a couple of occasions, etc. It's a list.